What is happening out there, Roto Scouts hoops fans? I almost said baseball, and I tried to get to basketball, and then I stumbled into hoops. Don't really know what that was. Can I take that one again? What is happening out there, Roto Scouts basketball fans? There we go. Get the little announcer voice going. Anybody out there yet? Looks like a quiet day in chat so far. Sure some people will start trickling in the door in a little bit. We are here to talk about a really exciting looking 6-game main slate. Both sites, 6 games for a change. Nice, clean breakdown. Looking forward to talking this one through. It's another NBA Cup slate, so that gets competitive. Makes for fun game environments. So hopefully we've got a lot of stuff to talk through here. Seems like I'm talking to myself still right now, though. What, did I offend everybody? So 6 games on the board. Already sorted by DraftKings. You can see there's a couple really big pieces on both sites to get into. A lot of guys coming up at significant ownership on the 6-gamer. A lot to go through. This really solid looking tournament on FanDuel. Nice little $5 buy, 100K to first. Big field. It's like 70-something thousand entries. But really nice one to dive into. Hopefully you guys did well last night. Projections were all over it last night, I felt like. I put 3 into the top 1% out of the handful of lineups that I put in on FanDuel. Nice, tidy little profit. Nothing crazy. Not one that's going to go out and, fund a trip to Europe or anything. But help keep the lights on. Help build the bankroll up. That's all you need. Keep putting lineups in the top 1%, and you get them over the top eventually. It's just a matter of, it's like erosion, right? You just keep on hitting that with a raindrop, and eventually, 20,000 years later, you eventually win a tournament. Kenny Woodhouse is here. What's going on, Ken? Good to see you, buddy. People are walking in the door slowly but surely. Got to start doing better with getting these things scheduled so you guys know exactly what time they're going to kick off and, when to be here and everything. But that's on me. But we'll get started here. Let me go through the Vegas board real quick. We've got some ins and outs and everything to discuss. We got the biggest piece of news of the day probably was Nikola Jokic. Came into the day questionable. Has been out for the birth of his kid. If you know anything about Jokic, it is no surprise that he's not exactly hurrying back. But he was questionable, and early in the afternoon, we got that he was out before I even had the projections posted. In fact, I got down to I was on the 5th or 6th game. I had gone through Denver already, had him in, and I circled back, but I didn't have to post it, undo it, and so on and so forth on the site. A few other pieces of news, but let's go through Vegas first. A lot of good-looking games. Cavs and Boston, really good Eastern Conference game just in terms of the NBA, the shape of what this year's NBA looks like. Really looking forward to that one. 235.5-point total also. 5.5 points, Boston favored by 5.5 in a home game against what has been at least a really, really good Cavs team. That should be an absolute brawl. I love the total. I think there's good pieces on both of those teams. They're kind of straightforward and obvious as far as who they are, but we'll see how they came up in Sims. I'm kind of looking forward to getting to some, and maybe we can find a few guys where it's one of those situations where, hey, low owned, even with the field, maybe we can grab a couple more shares of player X. We'll figure out who that is. Charlotte and Brooklyn, a close spread here, 3 points favoring Brooklyn at home, 221.5-point total there. Usual pieces and parts from that one. We do have Zaire Williams showing at the top of the board on the DraftKings slate as I'm thinking that through. He's very cheap with the expectation of minutes, so he's coming up as a major piece of value on DraftKings. Not as big a value on FanDuel, but still significant share of him. And then some of the obvious from across both of those teams. Charlotte basically still shaped like they've been. Haven't gotten any of their key pieces in the front court back yet. Denver at Memphis. This one went another 2 points in Memphis's direction after the Jokic news broke. So now Memphis is favored by 5.5 in a home game. They've gotten a lot of guys back. So their rotation a little bit murky, but there's better pieces now. We might actually have a chance to see what this Memphis team really looks like, the way that it's supposed to be constructed. 224.5-point total there. Definitely, still interesting pieces. We're going to see some pieces from Denver float up toward the top just based on the gigantic void that Jokic leaves and has left over the last few games there. So we'll see some of that. We'll see how much Memphis we get to. But everybody a little bit underprojected maybe in Memphis. Not underprojected. Everybody a little bit lighter expectation of minutes, I think, in Memphis. than in some of the other spots, especially if they do end up handling their business pretty efficiently against the depleted Denver team. I could see that just being one of those days where Memphis played 13 guys today. Everybody got a little time, but nobody got more than 31 minutes. That kind of a game. Biggest spread of the day, Dallas favored by 13 in a home game against that decimated New Orleans team. And I almost literally mean decimated, taken down by a factor of 10. They're just missing the entire team. The team that this was supposed to be is out tonight. So Dallas heavily favored. Luka's questionable. We'll see what happens with that. It seems like he's probably going to play. It's Luka, typically out there. 222-point total. Luka would be definitely a very interesting piece from the very top of the board as far as raw projection and cost and everything goes. One of the true pay-up spots of the day. Not necessarily coming up as a huge piece of ownership. We're getting I'm guessing, I haven't looked through the sim results that I just ran that you guys can see, but I'm guessing there's a ton of LeBron and AD on both of those, and more specifically on FanDuel. They just look terrific today. So I think we're probably going to see Luka get boxed out for some of those shares, but we'll go through it. OKC, San Antonio. I hope Luka's not just sitting there at like 60% at the top of the board on the sheet that I'm not looking at, but you guys are. Actually, I kind of hope he is. OKC, San Antonio. San Antonio, 9.5-point dogs at home to the very good OKC Thunder. 222-point total there. No Wemby for San Antonio. Really just kind of a meh game overall. I'm sure we can find some pieces to work with, and they'll probably come up somewhat in sims, but I don't know. That San Antonio side, I don't know how much they hold up their end. Devin Vassell went from in to questionable during the day, so we got to monitor that. Maybe we get some SGA on the other side of that one, but not my favorite spot of the day. And then rounding things out, as I just mentioned, 235.5-point total between the Lakers and the Jazz. That one's in Los Angeles. Lakers heavy 11-point favorites at home, the second highest spread of the day. But just pushing up love for AD and LeBron at the top of the board. They look terrific together. So definitely a lot to go through there. Let's do the injuries. Hopefully nothing broke in the last 2 minutes. All right, so still all good. Cool. So Devin Vassell, like I said, downgraded to questionable during the afternoon. So our probables are downgraded to questionable. So our questionables, I'll do it in a different order today. Our questionables are Devin Vassell, Karis LeVert, Sam Merrill, Isaac Okoro, which is 3 pieces to pay attention to there from the same rotation. Peyton Pritchard, maybe 20 minutes frees up for Boston. Trey Mann, Marcus Smart, Luka, obviously a biggie, and Rui Hachimura, which could have an impact for LA. Probables, Dorian Finney-Smith, Cam Thomas. Zaire Williams is confirmed as available, so is Colin Sexton, and AD is technically probable. Pretty much means AD is going to play. Outs are Max Strus, Dean Wade, Kristaps Porzingis, Daquan Jeffries, Nick Richards, Mark Williams, Bojan Bogdanovic, Nick Claxton, Day'Ron Sharpe, Aaron Gordon, Nikola Jokic, Zach Edey, Gigi Jackson, John Morant, Cam Spencer, Jose Alvarado, Jordan Hawkins, Herb Jones, CJ McCollum, DeJounte Murray, Zion Williamson, Dante Exum, Isaiah Hartenstein, Chet Holmgren, Isaiah Joe is out, Jalen Williams with a Y, Jeremy Sohan, Wemby is technically doubtful, but doesn't seem like he's going to be out there. Taylor Hendricks, Walker Kessler, Jackson Hayes, Jalen Hood-Schifino, Bronny James is technically doubtful. I put awful. And Jared Vanderbilt, it remains out. And that's it. There you guys are. 20 people showed up while I was breaking that down. Pinstripe Pimp is here. No reason to come back fire Memphis at all. Anthony Taylor. Cujo. What's up, Cuj? Cujo, you were late today. What happened? Good to see you, buddy. I'm going to lose until I win. The Millie's here. Mamba's here. So let's dig into this one. Ah, there's Luka. He did not come up on FanDuel. He came up a lot on DraftKings, though, 13% of the time. Interesting. So we'll go, since it's the same slate, we can go DraftKings positioning for a change. And we'll start with our guards. A little bit of different site to site as usual as far as the positioning goes. We'll talk it through as we go on. Just need to know who to play at power forward today. Thanks, Doc. John Collins. That was easy. See you, Mamba. You want another one? The next guy would be AD. LeBron. John Collins and LeBron. Got LeBron a little below the field on DK, it looks like. Level with the field at 45-ish%. I want more on FanDuel. All right, so back to the guards. Theodore Parsons here. He says, okay, Tara, I'm here to listening at work. Let's see you convince me to play LeBron. All right, I mean, you guys want to start with the forwards? We can do that. There's no reason. Nobody says we have to start with guards. Starting with forwards today. Welcome to a new format for the show. So depends on which site you're playing on, Theodore, Ted, Mr. Parson. If you're on FanDuel, I like LeBron better. The 10,000 works a little bit better over there than it does on the DraftKings slate. So you can see that just kind of in our exposures. Our top 150, we still got LeBron in 1 out of every 4 lineups, but that is an undercut to the DraftKings field. On FanDuel, we got him nearly 45% of the time, essentially, and basically level with the field. For the season, LeBron's been playing at a 1.34, despite seeing a decrease in usage. He's seen a spike in his assist rate because he's the primary facilitator out there. D'Lo's been playing off the bench, so there's just a good opportunity for LeBron to continue putting up his previous rates, despite them swinging some usage in AD's direction. So that's why I think they both work really, really well together, and you'll see that. I'm confident on FanDuel we'll see that. Yeah. 40. We got the exact same exposures to both of those guys on FanDuel, level with the field to both of those guys. They're both 50+ projected on FanDuel. We got AD much more significantly and level with the field on DraftKings. So between LeBron and AD on DraftKings, slight lean toward AD as far as like relative to the field, overall exposure size. But getting LeBron is definitely key. He's been a 1.40 per minute player on DraftKings this season. So among your forwards, outside of Zaire Williams, who's a shooting guard small forward eligible player at 6.06 value, LeBron at 5.39 is behind just $3,600 Julian Strother, who's a mix and match piece, $4,800 Lou Dort, $6,900 John Collins, who is a very good play from the mid-range on his own, and we got him 40% of the time and more than LeBron and level with the field and so on. But the fact that LeBron just puts up such a big value number by comparison, and most of the other guys are just a different category of player, makes LeBron exceedingly valuable on that DraftKings slate. So just because the sim came up a little bit below, that's because the field's getting there. But taking LeBron up to the field's number on DraftKings, no issue with it. If you can find the way to get there, he's just getting boxed out by a lot of this John Collins, a lot of the fact that we're like way, way over the field there. So he doesn't get as many opportunities to jump into the small forward spot because we're taking so many shares of Zaire Williams at that small forward spot. And then that's true, obviously, of some of these small forwards as well, who are all coming up a little bit. But LeBron on his own looks spectacular. I mean, 63.5% true shooting, 41.9% assist rate, 11.3% rebounding rate. If we're talking about just points per minute among all forward eligible players on DraftKings, his 1.40 is second only to Jason Tatum. Jason Tatum at 1.45 for 100 more. Came up a little bit less, also below the field, slightly lower projected overall. Gave LeBron a little bit more here. Tatum in a much more grindy contest facing Cleveland than LeBron is facing a wide-open Utah team. So there's a lot of different factors that really, really work in LeBron's favor. Again, we are a little bit below the field. This is 1 in 4. The field is... It feels like 10, 12, 15 points above that. So again, if you want to take LeBron 10 points north of this and level off, I think you're perfectly fine doing that. Just the way that the math collided with some shares here. You rerun this and he could be 28, some happenstance in between. But looks terrific. So Zaire Williams is just cheap, 3,900. Again, shooting guard, small forward eligibility. He's a .90 per minute player this year. He was a .79 on the FanDuel scale last year. This year, that's .91, is essentially the same guy on both sites. Hasn't really seen much of an uptick in like usage or anything like that. Just an is who he is player, just getting a little bit more minutes at a very cheap price. He is, on any given slate, very likely to revert to the .79 per minute player and give you kind of a clunky, disappointing game. Perfect example right here, 15.1 FanDuel points in 24 minutes the other day. It is well within the realm of possibility that you get that exact same kind of performance today. So it's a little bit of a, just cautious value spot, but it is a significant value spot because of the minutes over the price. 3,900, that puts him at a 6+ value score on DraftKings. 4,400 on FanDuel. He's small forward only over there, so he loses a little bit of that flexibility. We're getting him about half the exposure that we got to him on DraftKings, but he still comes up significantly above the field. So we've got basically the same position versus the field on him. It's just with a smaller share. So Zaire Williams does look like a piece of value on both sites. It's just much better value and more functional value on the DraftKings slate. John Collins is just good. Up 0.2 per minute this year on way increased usage. Last year, 1.07 on just under 20% usage. This year, with everything he's got to do, 1.29 on 26.8% usage. He got a lot more shots this year. Averaging 17.5 a game, 7.8 rebounds, 2.6 assists. That's a 19.1% assist rate, 14.2% rebounding rate, 61.3% true shooting. He's stuffing categories. On FanDuel, Collins at 7,600 didn't come up as significant a piece. That price is catching up to the production a little bit. He's very playable. He's 15% exposed in our top 150. That's just pretty hard undercut to the field. So we're leaving some Collins shares behind on FanDuel, probably in exchange for some of the LeBron that we're getting to, which I'm totally fine with. Some of these other guys, like, let's see, Trey doesn't collide with him, does he? Power forward, small forward shooting guard. It's a lot of Trey Murphy. So little undercut to the field there. I don't mind taking more, but maybe not getting all the way to the field. Let's say the field's like double this at 30. If you wanted to take them up to 20, just grab a few more shares. I think that's all right. But I don't know that you necessarily need to approach the field on the FanDuel slate. Just have some at 7,600. But at 6,900 power forward and center eligibility, that looks like a key piece. 40% level with the field on DraftKings. Perfectly fine to take a few more, but keep in mind the more that you take there, you're probably boxing yourself out of some of these. You're probably boxing yourself out of some ADs if you put them at center. Brendan Miller, one of the mix and match pieces, a little better than that actually. 24% and below the field on FanDuel, sub 5 in the value score, 5.1 on DraftKings where we're really looking for 5.5, but did come up 30% on DK level with the field, 24% on FanDuel, so a little bit more functional than a mix and match, heavy air quotes there, type guy. 0.98 so far this season, 25.2 usage is up a little bit. Assist rate at 22.9%. It's 3.8 assists per game. He's all right. It's not a play to get excited about. I think he just fits in for that 67, 66. If you see him kick down to the 0.89, he becomes a little bit of a disappointment at that price. He really does need to hover in this around 1.0. Like the other day, 33 points in 34.9. If we get that, that's okay. That's right about this. But we need him right there. If he slips at all at these prices, it's not great. Yeah, I put him at 0.96. Oh, that's still the DraftKings one, right? I keep changing these references. Yeah, it's the DraftKings ones. 0.96 DraftKings. So I've actually got him down a little bit tonight. Because DraftKings number, he's 1.01. So give him a 500th of a fantasy point per minute haircut. If you disagree, give him back a quarter of a fantasy point or so. Jaylen Brown looks pretty good. 10% on FanDuel, 29% on DraftKings. He's only 8,100 on DK. That's pretty key. Shooting guard and small forward eligibility. I would not mind having some additional shares of Jaylen Brown on DraftKings, honestly. That's a guy who's interesting to me. It's not quite where I want to be as far as like if we're level with the field-ish at 29%, call the field 25. I'd love to take 35 against that, have just a little bit of an edge. But that's also the kind of play, like I'd really love to do that against the field if we were level with the field on a guy like 10, 12% with that kind of ability on a short slate. But Jalen's terrific, 115 per minute FanDuel, 118 per minute DraftKings. Fills categories across the board, 53.1% true shooting, 15.3% assist, 10.1% rebounding rate. Again, it's another player in that grindy matchup with Cleveland and Boston, but that game has a great total on it. If you have any belief that Boston cares about this NBA Cup thing at all, then they need to win this game. So, presumably a competitive game environment. You could also goose some minutes there for guys like Jalen. I've got him at 37. I've got Tatum also at 37. It's like a 36, 38 range, so usually I put them in the middle when that comes up. But I could see each of those guys playing even more if it's a truly competitive game and they truly actually care about this NBA Cup thing. Lou Dort, we got him 40% of the time on the FanDuel slate. That's big uptick from the field. 5,400. On DraftKings, we got him at 28.6% and a little undercut to the field. So he is a key piece of value. He's 4,800, both spots, shooting guard, small forward eligible on DraftKings. 54 on FanDuel. No Isaiah Joe, so presumably a little bit more going on he's on the court all the time anyway. But he's also played at a little bit of an uptick in terms of his rate. So maybe just with a little bit more for all the regulars for OKC to do, we see a bit of a bump. It's also just a wipeout spot potentially for OKC in that game against a really weak San Antonio squad. I think he's honestly, if anything, you could give him a little bit more. I've got him basically halfway in between last year and this year. He's been a 0.85 per minute player on DraftKings. I've got him at 0.79. Last year, to put it on a FanDuel scale, 0.73 last year, 0.86 this year. Obviously, there's a little bit of back and forth difference between the two sites. But if you wanted to give him a credit for, his 0.85 that he's put up this year, I think that's okay. I mean, it would be a matter of giving him a 1.5 or so. So if you want to, I wouldn't necessarily take him down. I think if you want to take him up by giving him like 27.5 DraftKings points, it's not a bad value play and probably could even look better had I gotten aggressive about it. For the record, I think the way that I did it is correct. I don't think he's earned a 0.85 fully at this point, but it's one to watch. Christian Brown, 36% on FanDuel, 28.6% on DraftKings. Level with the field on FanDuel-ish, maybe a little bit more below the field on DraftKings, but essentially floating around the field on a player who's averaging 35 minutes, playing 35 minutes today. It's 0.84 per minute, but obviously big void of everything for Denver right now. So all these guys benefit from opportunity. It could be Christian Brown day. He's a decent mid-range piece. I wouldn't go running off and grabbing, 65% when the field's in the 30s, but leveling off around the field in the, high 20s to mid 30s is fine across sites. Strother's just a piece of value, 23 minutes projected at 4,300. Small forward eligible on FanDuel, stuck at just one share there. Doesn't look all that valuable there. Shooting guard and small forward for just 36 on DraftKings. He is coming up a little bit, 25% of the time, basically level with the field. 0.82 per minute this season. 17.2% usage in his moderate sample. What's he played? 21 and a half minutes a night. Gave him an additional like 1 or 2. I got everybody zeroed in like right around the rates for this situation. I've got him at 0.85. So technically giving him a slight uptick. Really only a piece on DraftKings, really only a value lever. It's not a player from whom you should expect a big ceiling. But, 19 to 23 and a half DraftKings points, somewhere in that territory. And just for $3,600 as a value square to pivot away from some of $3,900 Zaire Williams with the same positioning and taking some of these shares and just plunking them into that. Not completely crazy. We're only talking about a 3-minute difference between the two. They're essentially the same guy last year as far as production goes on the same kind of usage. You've gotten more production out of Zaire Williams this year, but it's close enough. We talked through LeBron pretty significantly, but again, major piece on FanDuel. We're level with the field, but I would not mind having 55, 60% if the field's in the 45 range. I'm a big believer in that spot today. On DraftKings, 24% and 1 in 5 and under the field. But again, if you want to take it up into the 35% range, I think you're okay. Dorian Finney-Smith, probable to play, just 6% of them and hard undercut to the field at 4,700 on FanDuel. He's never a player I get excited about. 0.69 per minute last year on 13% usage, 0.79 on 15%, minor uptick in usage. He's a moderate rebounder. He's okay. He's just kind of a vacuum for some minutes. If you see him kick up into like the high 30s for minutes situationally, then he becomes more valuable for price. Right now, in his who he is spot, really doesn't look all that appealing. The DraftKings side is definitely a different situation. 4,100 power forward eligible. That's different than 47, even with the multi-position on FanDuel. We did undercut him to the field, though. 19% is below where the field's at. Field's probably 25, judging by that. I would be perfectly fine having a little bit less, honestly. You can take that down to like 15 and be fine. There's not much sacrifice there. And we've got money to spend on this slate. Grant Williams did not come up on FanDuel, 5,500. Another guy, 17% on DraftKings. Looks like a little bit of a piece over there, 4,800, bouncing into some power forward and center shares. It's just a matter of how we're positioning things around, the AD play, the LeBron play, and where our other pay-ups are. But these solid mid-range value types do come through. 0.82 per minute so far this season from Grant Williams. He's just okay. But it's not like he's expensive. He's priced correctly for the 0.82. Situation's basically the same. Put up a 32-3 in 35 minutes the other day. You've got upside on the right night, maybe to a point per minute. Cam Thomas, 15.9% assist rate this season. He's 3.1 assists per game to go with his 24.6 points per game, but largely scoring dependent. Tends to come up for us. Tends to disappoint me. But numbers are saying we got to go back there. 18%, we're a little bit above the field on FanDuel. On DraftKings, you're lucky, 15% at 6,900 over there. He doesn't really come up. Different positional eligibility. Point guard, shooting guard on FanDuel is interesting. Shooting guard, small forward on DraftKings for 6,900. We got him 15% of the time, but that isn't a little bit of a haircut from the field. A little bit above the field here. And honestly, if this is a situation where the field's 12-ish%, on a good enough player who on the right day easily has trajectory into the 50s, 25, goose that a little bit. These are the kind of spots that I'm looking for when we go through this, where it's like, all right, the field's not heavy to Cam Thomas, and we're getting him a little bit ahead of that. So why not press that advantage, or heavy quotes advantage, and take a position? It's not mandatory. It's just an idea, and we'll see how it comes up. And if he gets diminished, it's not, like you can't pivot out of it as you're developing your lineups. But it does look like an interesting FanDuel spot. A lot less so on DraftKings. Aaron Wiggins, mix and match, 4,400, 15% below the field here, 12% hard undercut to the field on FanDuel. It's been 0.94 per minute this season, 0.87 last year. It's all right. I just not a big believer in any kind of ceiling out of this player, and we've got so many options at 47, 44 across sites. He at least does have multi-position on DraftKings. Gives him a little bit more utility. I think that's why we're a little bit more gentle to the field there. But not much more than a mix and match guy. Trey is really interesting here. Trey Murphy. Again, just still this ridiculously depleted New Orleans team. So a good player coming back into that situation. So far this year in his 3 games, 27 minutes a night. I've got him at 29 today. Was out for their last game, so we don't have last game number on him. But for the 3 games he's played, he's picked up 24.8% usage. That's up from an average of 18%, which is around the average last year. He's put up just 0.86 per minute so far. Has not shot well in his return, 45.4% true shooting. That's going to change. So if you're a believer in what he did last year on 6 points less usage, you got to assume once that shot starts falling, we're talking about a 1+ player here. Got him right around that territory for this one, 29-3 in 29 minutes. I think it's justifiable. Takes a lot of threes, 7.3 threes per game so far. He's made 27% of those 7 threes a game. Those are going to start falling. He's a better player than that. So I'd rather be early than late, and we are significantly above the field. So this is going to be the chance to get early on Trey Murphy. 65%, gigantic piece, way above the field on the FanDuel slate, it looks like. What was the ownership that ran against? I know he's highly owned over there. And again, these, we've been dealing with some big question marks on some of these ownership projections, so might have to resource at some point. Clicking on the New Orleans side would help. Yeah, so he's still massively owned by the field. As much as that looks like a gigantic advantage to the field, given how it's shaded and everything, remember all these colorings and so on and so forth are just kind of playing in relativity here to one another. Not like astrophysics relativity. So they're all relative to one another. So this is one of our bigger upticks from the field, but it represents about 20-ish points above the field. So major advantage, but it's not like the field's at 15 and we're at 65. On DraftKings, for 5,600, both forward spots, Trey barely landed at all. 12.6%, that's an undercut to the field. So one of our biggest upticks from the field on FanDuel and a fairly significant under on DraftKings. And that kind of jibes. He's about double this number on the DK slate in the ownership that it ran with. I think you could be okay taking a few additional shares, but it's just the $200 more of relative salary and the different positioning. Small forward shooting guard on FanDuel, small forward power forward on DraftKings, just getting boxed out by some of these better plays on DK. He's reasonable, though, to take a few additional shares, especially if you choose to take a bigger undercut on any of those guys. He's not a terrible pivot away from some shares of, say, Cam Thomas for a little bit more. So you can move some of those shares in and level him back up to the field if you're taking a harder undercut on any of those guys. He is a good player, just working his way back into form. He's only played 3 games. Getting down into the more thin shares on DraftKings, but we do have 11% of Lauri Markkanen for just $7,000. We've got Des Bane on the board at 10%. Under the field on both those guys, $7,000, $7,300. Probably just a factor of how those prices bounce off. These guys all essentially from DFS down fall into that bucket, excluding $10,100 Jason Tatum. Everybody here, and probably excluding Brendan Ingram there for 93. Everybody else in that highlighted group, a lot of interchangeable parts. So if you want to take your 11% where we're under the field on Lowry Markkanen and say, hey, I like the looks of Desmond Bane in that spot, or vice versa, and just sink all these shares into that guy or all those shares into this guy, that's okay. If you want to take some of these shares where we're recommending an undercut on these guys, move them down and try and get into these guys, or vice versa, also okay. A lot of maneuverability through that group of players at a variety of prices, but same positioning on DraftKings. Outliers on FanDuel from that group, we really don't have outside of the Trey Murphy situation. Brandon Ingram comes up very significantly on FanDuel. He's 9,300 on DraftKings, shooting guard, small forward. We got him, but only 9% under the field. On FanDuel, 38.6% above the field, but the field's got a decent piece. Figure the field's high 20s, low 30s. So we've got a little edge on Ingram, bigger edge on Murphy. But it looks like Pelly's are going to be a part of our lives between those two players. Lou Dort's going to be a part of our lives. Zaire Williams going to be a part of our lives at the forward position. At least Ingram's underpriced for the player that he is. 1.18 per minute on FanDuel this season. He's a 30% usage guy. Anytime you can get a 30% usage guy in the mid-8s, that's pretty good. Just a lot of opportunity there. He's a good facilitator, mediocre rebounder. 6 boards a game, 5.4 assists, 28.5% assist rate, 8.9% rebounding rate. Certainly no Jason Tatum. 145 per minute for Tatum on DraftKings, 139 per minute this season on FanDuel. I'm glad we've got some. 10% we're a little below the field here. 7% we're a little below the field here. One of the true stars on the slate. And again, remember, if we look at points per minute among all the forward-eligible players on DraftKings, Tatum actually leads the way at 1.45. We do get more of LeBron at 1.40 for a little bit less, but there's reasonable back-and-forth action between those two players on that slate. So if you want to move shares off LeBron and into Tatum, no issues with it. It's just a tougher game environment. Good total. Again, good total there. But that's more like good teams lofting each other to success. There's difficult situations for a lot of these guys on a individual basis. Not that knocks Tatum down in my overall esteem. Again, one of the true star players on this slate. So 10% if you wanted to take it up to 15, even if you wanted to double it and get up to the field on FanDuel. It's Jason Tatum, so you're not... If you're making a mistake, it's not a big one. And it's one that could work out for you. Miles Bridges did not come up on FanDuel, 5% on DraftKings. Cody Martin didn't come up on FanDuel outside of one share, 4% on DraftKings. Champagny, 27% FanDuel. I wasn't expecting that. 4,600, he's shooting guard, small forward. He has been coming up in this situation. 0.77 per minute. I don't love that player or spot or anything really about it. Got him right on his averages. .3% below the field on DraftKings at 4,800 shooting guard, small forward. For the $200 discount on FanDuel, he's coming up a whole hell of a lot more. I don't know. I just really don't like much from San Antonio going up against that OKC team. And to me, to take that big of a share of a guy who's just a 0.77, a low usage guy, even with a diminished situation that could benefit some players like him, it's tough. What's his actual ownership? I think I'd rather on Champagny. I think I would at least consider forgoing the advantage there, because I don't know that it actually is an advantage. It mathed out as one, obviously. What standard deviation did he run at? Might be a little high. I don't love that spot. I think I'd be, I wouldn't forgo like the entire share of the player. Don't misunderstand. But I think instead of taking the big advantage at 27%, I'd be probably happier and more profitable in the stay with the field 15, 17 kind of a range, maybe 20. I don't know that I need the additional shares. I want to have some, but I think that's a player I'm comfortable being closer to the field on. I don't see the big slate-breaking game coming out of him where you're going to really need it. Not against this OKC team. Anthony Taylor's getting that 100K tonight. Anthony Taylor says, next NFL show, I asked to put some respect on Knicks. Chicago coaches suck. He's been doing well, man. It's I would love to have him here in New York. Maybe not for the full career, but like this year. I'd much rather have him quarterbacking my team than Daniel Jones, who's no longer quarterbacking my team. Tommy DeVito time. Not happy. Power says I would be on OKC. Coach said he's not going to treat this game any different. I take that as once they blow out San Antonio by the end of the third quarter, SGA and Jalen Williams will get pulled sooner than later. Lowest owned optimal at each position is always a good approach. See, I mean, is anybody much more enthusiastic about that kind of a position on Champagne on FanDuel? It's again, it's fine if you go there. And I might end up there, especially depending on how much of a hurry I'm in, and if I just take the top of the sim and throw it into the slate later. So we'll see how that goes. Again, I've got him like right around his current year numbers, which are essentially his previous year numbers. I'm not going to adjust it, I don't think, outside of maybe the minutes, but that's what he plays. I've got him at 29. He plays 28 too. Not wild about that spot. 4.77 too. It's not like he's even showing a good 5+ value score. It's like there's so much more to work with. Actually, I mean, looking at it, you've got Zaire Williams up there, obviously, who came up 36%. For comparable price, he's 46. Shooting guard, small forward. 4.77. We don't actually have 4.74 on Aaron Wiggins. You could go to that and take the other side of that. I kind of like that. That's like a really specific position that this sim took, actually. It's 27% and above the field here, 12% and below the field there. So that's a straight line pivot. If I want to take 10, 12% out of this, I would probably put it right there. Level this with the field, level that with the field. Or, again, I mean, the sims, the math, the advantage isn't going with the way that the numbers are here. So maybe just a little bit of trepidation on my part. And again, we always do want to follow the numbers. But you rerun this and they level back out. You take a minute away and they level back out. So a lot of wrinkles that could come through on that one. That is a really close, interesting play on FanDuel. Sorry to spend so much time comparing Julian Champagnie and Aaron Wiggins here, but it's just an interesting little wrinkle spot that could end up proving pretty key. Oddly, those are the kinds of plays that change slates. 10% of Kyle Filipowski. If you want him, he's there. 4.67 value score. No real love. Level with the field. DraftKings didn't come up at all. 7,900 for Evan Mobley. We got him 6% of the time, little below the field on FanDuel. We got him 2% of the time, little below the field on DraftKings. I wouldn't mind a few additional shares on either site, but don't go crazy. I would say 10% or less on either side is fine. Rui, mix and match piece. Triple J came up for us on FanDuel, power forward and center eligibility for just 8,300. That'll do the trick. On DraftKings, hard undercut to the field, 0% of Triple J at 7,900. That's kind of a surprise. 4.86 on the value scale there. We're typically looking for 5.5 though. Very good player, obviously. Should have essentially nothing in his way as far as doing whatever he wants. tonight. So I don't mind taking more than a 0 share on Triple J over here. And I'm happy we got him like 15% over here. I think that works. Let's jump back over to the guards. If you joined us late, we actually started with the forwards today because there were so many questions about it. So, in addition to Zaire Williams, who is guard eligible on both of these slates and who we already talked about at length, Jamal Murray is a big piece on both sites. And I talked about it when Jokic first went out. And if you look back, Jamal Murray doesn't go up necessarily in fantasy production with Jokic off the court. He actually goes from like 1-2-2, 1-2-2, 1-2-1 over the last couple of years to like 1-1-7. But the situation is such that at 81, at 83, even if you give him that, even if you account for the 0.91, 0.93 at which he's playing this year, the price and the opportunity and the minutes are still such that it's driving him to be one of the best plays on the slate anyway. I have him projected for the situation that I'm talking about, not for the situation where it's, oh my God, it's a runaway freight train of value for Jamal Murray. You could have given him, and I've seen him projected a couple points higher than this. And by a couple, I mean 3 to 4. So if anything, there's just upside there. We're already getting him 56.6% of the time and ahead of the field on FanDuel, 42.6% of the time and level with the field on DraftKings. I think he looks like a great play. I don't know that I want him more than what we're getting, though. Just given the production, like last game, for example, 39.7 FanDuel points in 37-1. That's fine. But it's only like this. It's not, he didn't go out there and put up 50-something. So the opportunity is what it is. It's right there in front of us. Have a ton. But I don't know that I chase the field into like the 60s, the 70s, and so forth. It's more clearly so on DraftKings, 40% level with the field. I don't know that I crack 50% on DraftKings unless the situation becomes, even different, even more different. On FanDuel, where we're getting a lot of them and pushing ahead of the field, that's where I keep an eye on it. Mama says 9.5 without Wemby implies someone from San Antonio will be smashing, and I'm putting my weight on Collins. I'm 225. Think about that 9.5 without Wemby is crazy, so revenge game is probably going to be crazy for Collins. I guess. Yeah, it should probably be a bigger spread. Now that I'm thinking about it. I just don't know that it means like there's, one specific guy that is like naturally going to succeed. Like, I think you're leaping to a conclusion from a good point. Yeah, that line should probably be a little bit juicier, that spread. But I don't know that that necessarily means like fire away on Opportunity X. Where was Collins? Stupid Colin Sexton. Hey, we got him 38% of the time on FanDuel, just 5% of the time on DraftKings. He's center only on DraftKings. That's your huge difference. 5,500 center only on DK. FanDuel, you get power forward eligibility for 54, 38% of the time level with the field over there. Collins is a good player in a good situation. He succeeded in a big way the other day, 37-2 in 26.3. I think that's the right player to pick from San Antonio, full stop. So, like, if you think that your idea about the Vegas line there just adds credence to the idea that he's already a good play, then sure, take more on DraftKings. You're not going to hurt yourself necessarily by having more of him in just the raw points that you're getting at center. It's just this is telling us there's better avenues to spend that money on the large scale. But in any given lineup, putting Zach Collins at center on DraftKings is perfectly fine today. 5.09 value score, but you do have a number of other value scores in that territory at that position. But like one of them is Ben Simmons. That's a pretty comparable play. So if you wanted to tell me, hey, I took more of John Collins than I took of Ben Simmons for 4,700 center only on DraftKings, I found the 800 per lineup and I spent it up and got to more Zach Collins. Sure. I would probably advise people to do that. I'm not a big Ben Simmons fan, and I think Zach Collins is a decent player. You can see it right in their per minute rates. You get a 1/10 of a point per minute more out of Collins so far this season. So yeah, I'm with you. But I don't know that I am with you on the angle. I don't know that it's necessarily because of the angle. I think Collins just on his own is in that situation. Hopefully that made some sense. I'm a loser till I win the Millie says, the big question is, who's going to bust tonight? How about LaMelo Ball? I was just looking for a guy that we had a pretty hard undercut to the field on both sides. LaMelo came up just 14% on FanDuel. He's 9,600 over there. 1.35 per minute on a massive 36.7% usage share. 2% on DraftKings. He's 9,800 point guard only over there. He's just very expensive. So the way that we get him against the field is a little bit clunky. I don't mind having him 14% of the time here. I think you could grab a few additional shares beyond the 2% on DraftKings. He's just a difficult price fit. He's been very, very good in a point per minute sense. He's got all the opportunity in the world to succeed and do whatever he wants on the court on any given night. But the way that he's bouncing off the rest of the field, technically, even if he goes out and puts up a 50-point game on both sites, that's not necessarily success. So if that qualifies in your mind as a bust, I'm not saying LaMelo is going to go out there and put up a 15-point fantasy night. I'm saying that his 50 points is not necessarily going to be enough. So that's a bust. So it depends. Who's a sub 5% owned guy who might break the slate tonight? I assume you're talking DraftKings. Let me pull up the most current numbers they got over there. Whew, 455 already. Jeez. Flying by. All right. 5% exposed territory. It's difficult to do this and jump back to our board here, but let me see. Where is he? I want to make sure we actually got him before I give you the answer. We did, but we didn't get him any more than LaMelo Ball. Kind of like Donovan Mitchell there. 126 per minute, 30% usage on the FanDuel scale, 130 per minute on DraftKings, sub 5% owned. That was the qualifier for that question. He doesn't look great in our sim, but if you're talking about a sub 5% guy who could come out and lay 60 fantasy points out there, that's definitely one of them. Doesn't look like SGA is all that highly owned. He obviously qualifies for that. Where did SGA come up? We got a little bit more of SGA. We're like level-ish with the field. That's a player where feel free to take more shares of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Against San Antonio, monster upside. 1.49 per minute. But to the point, if they're completely blowing the doors off this team, even in a situation where point differential matters, because it's the NBA Cup and so on and so forth, you could see a little bit of easing up on the minutes for Shai. But if they're blowing him out by that, Shai's probably gotten you at least most of the way to where you want to be. So the answer to that question is typically always going to be like a star player who's just low owned and not necessarily fitting into the slate via the math, but has SGA type, Donovan Mitchell type, any given slate I'm going to rip off 50 real life points kind of upside. So it's just guys like that. Continuing on through the guards. We have not made much progress through the guards yet. So Jamal Murray, big piece on both sites. Comes with, this is with the way that I see the Jamal Murray opportunity, and the only direction to push it is upward. But could disappoint in a situation where people are expecting a lot. Could come out and this is disappointment, right? 37-1. He played 37-1. He put up 39.7. It was a good game. Wasn't a great game. But that was also a functional game at 81-83 across sites, so it was all right. Jordan Clarkson, mix and match piece, 29 minutes projected. We didn't get him at all on FanDuel, 1.3%, but we got him 34.6% of the time on DraftKings. He's a $5,200 shooting guard on DraftKings. He's a $6,000 point guard shooting guard on FanDuel. That price difference makes all the difference in the world. 1.09 per minute on DraftKings. Not a bad piece in that late game. There's an hour between that one, 9:30, 10:30. Things could change. So having some swappable parts in that game is probably a good idea. And Jordan Clarkson's, put up a respectable per minute number this year. He's got a 28.9% assist rate. Decent player, multi-category contributor. Miller we talked about already. Drew comes up a little bit, 11% on FanDuel. He's only 5,600. That's not bad. He's only 0.79 per minute this year. He was 0.89 last year. 5,200. He's a 30% piece on the DraftKings slate at point guard. Very, very cheap for just a good player. But again, it is a game where with a healthy total on it, it is going to be a grind for some of these players. I think where we got him is appropriate, but I don't know how much we go beyond that because I don't know what the real ceiling looks like. I think we've got an opportunity to catch regression to the true player with Drew more than we've got an opportunity to capture a gigantic ceiling game, if that makes sense. So it's just good player a little bit too cheap if we catch his regression to the mean. Jalen we talked about looks great, more so on DraftKings where we got him nearly 30% of the time. Lou Dort we've talked about. Christian Brown we've talked about. Strother we've talked about. A lot of multi-position here. Austin Reeves, interesting piece, mid-20s on both sides, basically 1 and 4 on both, level with the field on both. 4.96 value score on FanDuel, not quite as functional as the 5.12 on DraftKings. He's also a point guard shooting guard on DraftKings, small forward shooting guard on FanDuel. So a little bit of a different piece in terms of how he fits with other things. But it looks like he is giving a fair amount of functionality from the mid-range at those prices. Not bad. 1.0 per minute on the DraftKings scoreboard. On FanDuel, 0.97. Decent enough usage. You do have him, there's any given slate could get absolutely overshadowed by the superstars that he shares the court with. But he's been playing well in this situation. This is a good example of an overshadowed game. 40.8 in his last game played, 25.9 FanDuel points. That's off pace. So bear in mind that you could get that, and with the price kind of creeping up at 71, it could be a disappointing spot. But I think that's why we're just level with the field on that one. Schroeder, a little bit below the field, 12%. A little bit below the field, 17%. Perfectly fine to have some Dennis Schroeder in your life, but I wouldn't go crazy with him. 6,500 over there, 6,100 on the green site. He's just all right. 0.94 per minute on 21.9% usage. Solid 26.5% assist rate this season. He's given us some good games. Could deliver some upside against Charlotte. There's no real threat there defensively, so just if I'm going to the Brooklyn side, I'm probably leaning into more Cam Thomas for the raw scoring potential, for the 30+% usage rate, rather than trying to collect fantasy points with Dennis Schroeder, who's going to rely a lot on guys like Cam Thomas making their shots to pick up those assists anyway. Why not just go to the source and take the Cam Thomas shares? On DraftKings, they just kind of came up evenly, but that's more of a thing on FanDuel. Especially with Cam Thomas carrying point guard eligibility there. That's almost a direct 1-for-1 with a $600 price difference. Again, Luka on DraftKings, 13%, 1.43 per minute this season. A little bit diminished so far this season. On the FanDuel scale, last year it was 1.64. This year it's 1.38. But it's Luka Doncic. Presumably most of that production levels off and comes back as the season continues. And the any given slate 100-point upside is always worth buying a little of. A little bit lighter than the field on DraftKings, but if you wanted to have 15, 18%, you're fine. Any time with these superstars, you can buy additional shares. On FanDuel, didn't get them. 11.6, very expensive. And remember, we're just spending on a lot of shares of LeBron, a lot of shares of AD, a lot of shares of Brandon Ingram right here for 86. So I think he's just getting squeezed out by that price. but I would have no issues taking up to and including 10% on FanDuel and just if you're going to build a little fort on a hill Luka Doncic is a pretty good one to build it on. Nice view up there. Stephon Castle, 11% FanDuel, 10% DraftKings, basically level with the field on both. Price is up a little bit now on FanDuel, 53 for 0.81 per minute. That's just kind of 49 on DraftKings. It works a little bit better, but level to the field or a little undercut, I think, is the approach. Bane we talked about as a mix and match. Ingram, again, exciting spot on the FanDuel slate at 86. Not so much on DraftKings at 93. Colin Sexton, a serviceable mix and match quality guard. 5,600 on FanDuel, 5,600 on DraftKings, point guard, shooting guard on both. He's just diminished in output so far this year. It's only 13 games, so we don't want to go too crazy with it. But he's down from 113 to 0.91 so far this year on the FanDuel scoring scale. We got him 10% of the time, basically, across sites. We're harder undercut to the field on the FanDuel slate. We've seen enough Colin Sexton to maybe have enough faith to give him a little bit more. What do I actually have him at? And I did. Between doing these, changing these, then going and doing hockey projections, it being like 4 hours ago. So I've got him a little bit higher than this, but nowhere near that. Still sub 1. I guess I could have just looked and done that math. He's all right, and you could give him a little bit more. So if you end up getting him level with the field at like 12 or 15%, I don't think it's a situation where it's like, oh my God, my hair is on fire. I got to get Colin Sexton out of my lineups. I think that's just giving him a little bit more of his career history, which is not necessarily wrong. 12% of SGA, again, looks like a very grabbable piece on the FanDuel slate and on DraftKings. 5% over there, you can absolutely double, even triple that and be perfectly fine. On FanDuel, if you double it into the 1 and 4 territory, you're just, again, taking it an advantage against the field on an excellent player who is one of the best per minute players on the slate. In fact, I think he's the best per minute guard. Yep. SGA so far this season is the best per minute guard eligible player today. So do with that what you will. He is 800 cheaper than Luka, who has been 0.12 off the production level. Again, this is small sample stuff. Nobody here is saying that SGA is better than Luka. Otherwise, onesie-twosie shares of all these guys, including Donovan Mitchell, LaMelo Ball, who we talked about both briefly before. We did get the 14% of LaMelo here. If you want to take some of that and invest it in a slightly cheaper Donovan Mitchell, I think that's a reasonable opportunity on FanDuel, especially that's actually interesting. Granted, he's going up against Boston. But again, that game does have a 235.5 point total. So there is an expectation of scoring to come out of that game, despite two good defensive teams there. The fact that this is the exact kind of play I was talking about, and sorry to circle back again to that same Donovan Mitchell sub 5% who could break the slate. This is the exact kind of play I was talking about at the beginning of the show when I said I like to get to really, really good players and grab a little advantage, particularly when they're essentially not owned by the field. And Donovan Mitchell, we got one share of him in our top 150, and that's not even a red undercut to the field. So figure the field went at 2 to 5%. So if I just casually drop 10% of Donovan Mitchell into my lineups and forgo the LaMelo share that the sim is telling us is a harder undercut to the field, and I save $200 per instance doing that, that seems like a great pivot to me. I kind of sort of really like that. Again, I get it. Donovan Mitchell's going up against a good defensive team. Overall, he is a worse per minute performer than LaMelo is. But if we're just looking for a spot where the public isn't, that's an interesting one to me, and especially when you can get him in this kind of a situation. And it's the same thing here with a much bigger price gap. LaMelo at 98, point guard only, versus Donovan Mitchell at 9. take those 2% of LaMelo and just get at least to the field on the Donovan Mitchell play. And then if you can find some other shares elsewhere, I think that makes sense. So the fact that LaMelo was my bust answer and Donovan Mitchell was my star who's going to break the slate at under 5% ownership, you guys know what to do. Load up on LaMelo Ball. Where are we? Jalen Noel, 10% on FanDuel. No shares on DraftKings. Scottie Pippen, 27% on FanDuel. That's reasonable. I've just got him at 25 minutes. He's been a 1.08 per minute player on FanDuel this year. Again, a lot of bodies back from Memphis. But this is right around, this projection is just right around what Scottie's been playing. 25.5 the other day, put up 29.6 FanDuel points. I can buy into some of that for 5,800. There are worse ways to spend your point guard shares. Not relevant on DraftKings for 6,900 over there. Wow, that's a big price difference. I didn't clock that earlier in the day. $1,100 price difference on Scottie Pippen. Holy hell. 3.77, one of the worst value opportunities on DraftKings. 461, he's just fine on FanDuel. Again, we're looking for 5, but that plays. Brendan Boston, 14%, but a fairly hard undercut to the field with a decent projection on. Price is just up. 6,400, better spots to go. Playable and probably should have around that 15, but that's another one where if you want to take some of these shares and move them up to, obviously you need to find another $3,000, but try and figure out ways to move them into those guys, or more particularly into Donovan Mitchell. I skipped over Russ, 7%, hard undercut to the field on FanDuel, just 2% on DraftKings. There's the idea that, Denver lacking scoring is going to need to lean on Russ to do his thing, whatever that is these days. But he's just not been great. 1.11 per minute though so far on both sites, down from 1.16 last year, which was down from the mid ones once upon a time. 47.6% true shooting this year is pretty disappointing. He does have a solid 34.6% assist rate, still a decent facilitator. Taking just 3.5 threes a game, making 33%. He's averaging 10 points a game in his 25-ish minutes, 24-2. It's not like he's expensive. I just think he's a lower-end mid-range play. Trey Jones, 7%. Nothing on DraftKings. A couple onesie-twosies around Alex Caruso, Chris Paul. Between the two, I'd rather have... Well, I was going to say I'd rather have Caruso. Yeah, I think I probably would. Even though Paul's projected way higher, Caruso at 4,000, giving us a little bit more. Let's jump over to the centers, and then we'll pull up some ace-mine lineups real quick, and we'll take a look at what these shapes of these lineups actually looks like. And then we will get out of here so that I can keep an eye on the news. Let me reload Twitter here and see what we got. By the way, follow at RotoScouts on Blue Sky. If you're on Twitter, we're still there. Follow it on Twitter as well. But Blue Sky, it's the place to be these days. Mama says Boston or Brooklyn value. I mean, Brooklyn is getting a ton of value around Zaire Williams. He was our top-owned guy on both sites, basically. Or not top-owned on FanDuel, but significant chunks and way ahead of the field. Zaire looks like a very good value square on both sides. So for value, I think your answer is definitely Brooklyn. We got a little bit of DFS on DraftKings at 19%. We got a little bit of Schroeder at 17%. Those guys are more mid-range type plays to me. 41, I guess DFS is a value play. So Dorian Finney-Smith, assuming he goes. Zaire Williams, value plays. And then the guys that we're getting from the Celts are more just good players. We got some Drew. We got some Jaylen Brown, both in significant chunks in the 30% range. Drew, if you want to call him a value player at 52, I guess. It's more like I described him before, like a good player who's a little bit underpriced here, which, yes, that is the definition of value. But I tend to reserve value for like sub 5,000, plays like this. It's a different kind of a play, but now we're just playing semantics. I do think Drew looks great. Jaylen Brown, again, But yeah, I would qualify the Brooklyn guys more as, DFS values than the Celtics guys, but they're both coming up a ton. So get them both. Fortunately, you've got a lot of different guys at a lot of different positions, and you can get them both. AD, as discussed all show long, 44% level with the field, huge piece on FanDuel, 48% level with the field, huge piece on DraftKings, 159 on your FanDuel scale, 156 on DraftKings. Believe that makes him the highest overall performer in a per minute sense on the entire slate. It does. And it does. Both sides. Just looks like a great piece. I think you go there. I think you mash the LeBron button. They should be able to absolutely destroy this Utah team. But John Collins is holding his own. 40% exposure to him on the other side of that. I like the idea of having a lot of shares of both of those guys here to swap around if need be. A lot of maneuverability in that late game if you're reserving shares like the Sims are saying we should. Collins just 15% on FanDuel. It's a player I wouldn't mind having a little bit more of, and I know we talked about him for the forwards breakdown. But again, he's just been excellent, and he's filling multiple categories very, very well. True shooting, assist, and rebounding. So he's just good. So the fact that I can get a very good player at the $7,600 price, I would probably stick below the field. But if I end up more than that 15%, I'm not going to cry about it. Dario Saric stepping into opportunity once again. 24% of them because he's 4,700 on DraftKings. We didn't get him on FanDuel because he's 5,900 over there. Got boxed out of a lot of FanDuel shares by Mr. Zach Collins, who we just discussed before. 38% of Collins for 5,400. Just completely destroyed Dario Saric at 5,900. It also completely destroyed Grant Williams at 55. We just got a lot more Zach Collins. Either one of those guys as mixers, taking some shares of, those are fair prices for those two players, but they're just are who they are kind of prices. They're not unique. But Saric very likely to go out there and play 30 minutes again and is a distinct value on DraftKings. 5.33. Again, we're looking for 5.5, but that's way better than the 3.98 we're getting from him on FanDuel. 24% if you want to level it up to wherever the field is, that's fine. 4,700. He's just a value square. Grant Williams, somebody asked before, looks okay. 17%. We're below the field there. I think the question was phrased specifically about, somebody asked. Who did somebody ask? I know I saw a Grant Williams question at some point. Well, I can't find it, but I thought it was in there. No, I just saw Beantown's comment. Is the mic cutting in and out for you guys? Hopefully not for everybody. Beantown, apologies for your mic cutting out issues. So yeah, Grant Williams, just looks like who he is on DraftKings. I'm fine at 17. I'm fine at 15. I'm also fine at 20. But I wouldn't want to get too extreme in any direction. That also applies to Ben Simmons. Simmons has been at 1.0 on the DraftKings scale. For $4,700, you could do worse. He has a 5.2 value. There's a lot of maneuverability through these guys. Some of those guys were highlighted in the forward spot when I was talking about all that maneuverability. And you can throw guys like Charles Bassey at 55 into that mix. So we got below the field at 5%. Nope, that was Collins. Charles Bassey, we got at 8% and below the field. He's 3,400. Jay Huff at 33. We got 11% and below the field. I've got Huff at 16 minutes. There's probably a little bit of room to take him north from that. If you want more Jay Huff, you're welcome to it. Jalen Williams, 23% on FanDuel. Pretty happy about that. 11% on DraftKings. He's a 1-3-1 player. He's one of the better per minute guys in that $8,000 price range and soon to be north of that, I think, on both sides. Just a really good overall player. Center only on DraftKings. Power forward, small forward on FanDuel. He's functionally different across sites. Happy to have him here. Would take a few additional shares of him here. Just, again, another player who, given the spectacular per minute play, he's really only getting edged out of some of these shares because you've got the big pay up there that's soaking up a lot, and then you've got so many. Look at all the price differences around him. The only guy at comparable price is Evan Mobley at 79, and we only got Mobley 2% of the time. But if you're not using these value squares, those are shares that you're absolutely putting either into AD up top or directly into Jalen Williams, in my opinion. He's the next best just raw per minute guy. Not a bad option to have as far as like a DraftKings pivot. A lot of maneuverability at the position on DK. On FanDuel, we got 11% of Ben Simmons where he's a point guard or center. Interesting eligibility for Simmons on FanDuel today. That's a pretty hard undercut to the field. He's a 0.98 per minute player. I never mind undercutting Ben Simmons. I've got him at 24 minutes. He's averaged about 24, but there's upside to 26, 27. But I'd rather be, I think, where we are versus the field there. We got 40% of Derek Lively for 4,900, so it looks like the significant value square on FanDuel at the center spot, which means most of our AD shares, or a big chunk of our AD shares, are coming up at power forward. Brandon Clark came up pretty significantly. He's a center only on DraftKings for 38. Really didn't land that much, but again, you could take your favorite from among these $3,000 center options and just take all of those shares with that guy if you want to build a big position. There's no real one of those guys that stands out all that much compared to any of the others. So play the price, ownership, positioning game theory it a little bit. On FanDuel, he's a much different piece. He's only projected at 21 minutes, but he's power forward and center eligible. He's only 3,900 over there. It's a 0.85 per minute in his 13 games this year. 112 per minute last year. No Edie. I'd rather have some Brandon Clark, I think, than some Jay Huff. And on FanDuel, that's quite clear. He's just very cheap for a decent enough player. He could play a few more minutes than that, too. Mobley 6% on FanDuel, 2% on DraftKings. Just mix and match quality. But again, another player with decent upside. 1.21 FanDuel, 1.20 DraftKings as far as his points per minute. The fact that you can get him sub 8,000 is just not a good spot going up against Boston. If I'm playing guys from that game, I'm kind of, as much as I love the Cleveland Bigs, I'm kind of focusing on the guards, the wings. I think that's the approach there. And that's what the Sims are really mathing out with. But a few additional, like if you're 10% Evan Mobley on either site, it's nothing to worry about. He's a good enough player to pay that off easily, even in that game. Jared Allen is a little bit less extreme, but falls into similar buckets. We also got him a lot less, one share on both sites. A little bit of an undercut to the field, but the field's really not there. So again, with nobody there, it does make him a little bit more interesting for 5 to 10 shares. Just a little piece. Messi 3%, nothing on DraftKings. Really nobody else. Everybody else came up pretty empty. And honestly, you can tell that just by look at where everybody down here is kind of projected. And we got a lot of guys that in similar numbers at lower prices up here. Al Horford, Jeremiah Robinson Earl, everybody in the 20s. Tops for minutes, Messi, 27 minutes. Didn't really, he came up 3%. I wouldn't begrudge a few shares of Al. I wouldn't begrudge a few shares of a cheap Robinson Earl maybe. But nobody down there looks particularly good. Maxi Kleber, no minutes. No situational change for a guy like, the Cornets of the world down board. Zeke Naji just not picking up the time in that depleted Denver situation. I think that's it. Let's there you go. I'm going to lose it till I'm... Thanks, bud. Asked earlier if Grant was viable over Horford at 48 if Horford plays 32. So I've got Horford at 27 minutes. He did play 32 the other day. Put up 30 FanDuel points. If he goes back to that territory, would he become a better play than Grant Williams, who doesn't really look great to me? I would probably still lean Grant Williams. Well, no. I'm sorry. I forgot that you asked if he played 32 minutes. Um, yeah, if that's your hypothetical, I would take Horford over Grant Williams, but I don't think that situation necessarily would make Horford the best way to spend that money, considering we're only at 17% on Grant Williams as the situation exists, and that is below the field. So inserting Horford into that question just would make, and 30 minutes into that question would just make him look worse, would bring Horford up the board into, this kind of territory, but he'd probably be like a gentle yellow arrow pointing down in that situation. So yes, he would get better. Yes, I would probably prefer him to Grant Williams if you're assuming those minutes, but I don't know that I would want him more than a little bit more expensive John Collins or necessarily more than a Dario Saric or a Ben Simmons, all these guys that are just interchangeable. But he would become one of these interchangeable guys. Let me pull up some Ace Mine. We'll take a peek at what the lineups look like. If you're unfamiliar, by the way, I haven't been plugging anything at all today. If you're unfamiliar, rotoscouts.com. That's where all these projections live. You can access these projections for the hockey slate tonight and every night, every hockey main slate, every NBA main slate, every football showdown and main slate. And then when baseball comes back, all of baseball. Access to all of that, every single sport, not on a per sport sense, under $1 a day. Go check it out at rotoscouts.com. Follow the @RotoScouts Twitter handle and Blue Sky handle, and check out our guys over at acemine.io, which is where we're going right now to take a look at the lineups that were created behind the sim results, if I can manage to actually get it on the screen. Here we go. acemine.io, sim tools, optimizers. Promo code RotoScouts, all in caps, get you 20% off your first month over there. DraftKings. So again, these are just to take a look at what the lineups actually look like. Figure if we can find common themes and where money's being spent and so forth. Does look pretty Starsy Scrubsy. Not a surprise with all that value on the board. Top lineup here's got Luka and SGA in it. Using Julian Strother, Jay Huff, DFS, Jalen Wilson, Jordan Clarkson, and Jamal Murray. So you get some decent players up this way. Value, and then superstars. That's a little bit of an outlier from our most common constructions, though. We do have a lot of Drew coming through over here. Drew and Jaylen Brown getting there in that one. A lot of Lou Dort just coming through in the guard spot. Looks like we are safe to spend some money at point because like all of Drew, Jamal Murray, Dennis Schroeder are at least like mid-range spends. And then we've got plenty of Lucas coming through. So I think there's money to be spent at point. Definitely we're saving money more at the shooting guard because we've got Zaire landing there a lot. He also qualifies at small forward. So if you're not getting him here, you're pretty much getting him here. Obviously, either one of these, you can plug into either one of these. There's only so much we can do here. But it does look like we're getting like essentially value mid or the other way around. The power forward looks like a very straightforward decision between you're either spending up to a guy like LeBron, some John Collins in there, and it's mostly LeBron, or you're taking another value. Some Grant Williams, DFS spots. So outside of like LeBron, John Collins, that power forward spot also trends value. AD or value at center, as we saw with all those $3,000 guys that were at the top of the board when we were looking at DraftKings Center. That's represented right here. All the Huff, the Dario, and so on. You do have a couple shares of like John Collins creeping through. There's AD here, and then there's more AD coming through in the util spot. Interesting builds. and then we're basically spendy in these back two spots. Or like in, the Aaron Wiggins case, we took John Collins over here. But pretty Starsy Scrubsy, if I had to put a term on it. AD with Jalen, with John Collins. Zaire, Grant, Dario, Lou Dort, and Schroeder. As ugly as some of those names might sound, like if you just told somebody who doesn't pay attention to the daily mechanics of a slate or doesn't understand, price and everything. If you told somebody that hey, I got a great lineup tonight. It's Anthony Davis. It's Jalen Brown. They'd be like, oh man, that's a great start. John Collins. Oh yeah, I heard he's playing really well this year. That's good. That's cool. And then it's Lou Dort and Dario Saric and Grant Williams and Zaire Williams. They'd look at you like you were nuts. But that's actually a pretty decent lineup. Those are functional value plays. And the reason I'm pointing that out is because that lineup specifically doesn't have one of the funkier outlier value guys like a Sandro creeping through in it. Good amount of Trey creeping through. Derek Lively landing a little bit as a value play. Not a ton of Huff. We do have Huff succeeding in some of the top lineups, though, which I don't love. Just a cheap spot. AD looking like your most important pay up, followed by LeBron somewhat on DraftKings. Those two players are more important on FanDuel. To go through those numbers, rewind the show. FanDuel board is definitely, I'm going to say, a little bit more balanced is a challenging word to use because we do have a fair amount of AD in here. We've got some LeBron. It does look a little bit more balanced, though, just eyeballing it. A lot of common values. Scottie Pippen stands out as a differentiated player for value across sites and succeeding in a number of these top lineups. Keep an eye on that, though. If we get any information about situation there, you could see that projection come down somewhat, and that would be pretty impactful for a player like that at a price like that. So watch that one. A lot of Champagne coming through at the top of the top lineups. We talked about him at great length. There's some Zach Collins, who we talked about. Ton of AD. Good amount of LeBron. A lot of Derek Lively coming up at center here. He was cheap. That was one of the more surprising ones. A little bit of Brandon Clark coming through. So it looks like FanDuel, as mentioned during the show, we're getting a lot of our AD at power forward, and we're getting a number of lineups that are LeBron AD, Jaren Jackson AD, I just saw AD Tatum. So you're going pretty spendy at power forward, and even the ones that aren't AD lineups, like Jalen Williams, Brandon Ingram, AD Zach Collins. Those weren't great examples of what I was about to point out. Feels like you've got a decent amount of spend in there, even in the non-AD lineups, is what I was trying to say. But maybe most of that is actually Collins. I feel like there should be a better path to like Tatum LeBron lineups here. Those are interchangeable parts to some degree, though. LeBron and AD are critical at the top of the FanDuel slate in the 40s. Ton of Trey to be expected. A lot of it landing at shooting guard. Some through the small forward spots, but it does look like he's coming up a little bit more at guard. And we did have a bunch of functionality for value at the small forward position and for upside, with LeBron fitting in there, with Ingram fitting in there, and then like the Julian Champagnes, the Zaire Williamses of the world. So it makes sense, I think, that we're getting more of our Trey at the shooting guard. A lot of Jamal Murray as expected. A lot of Jamal LaMelo combos here. Decent amount of Cam Thomas, who we saw pop up on FanDuel as a little bit of a differentiated play. So this is basically aligned as a... It does look like you can spend at both point guard spots if you want to, but the most common constructions are like a 1 and a mid. Right, like a Jamal, Scottie Pippen, Cam Thomas, Scottie Pippen. Jamal SGA is obviously spendy. Same thing down here. So you can double spend at point. Shooting guard looks almost exclusively value to like mid guys, depending on how you want to define that, with Trey Murphy taking up a ton of them. But who's like the highest price value guy in, or who's the highest price guy in Jalen? There's one Jalen share that crept through in that. Lot of just straightforward, mid to value. Christian Brown, Lou Dort, depending on how you want to define them. Same with Trey. But that is both spots are those guys. Then small forward is quite clearly a 1-1. Where you're going like one of the value guys, Champagny, Zaire, and then one of the LeBron, Brandon Ingram, et cetera, et ceteras. You could go double value there and take a more high-priced shooting guard, like in these lineups where like if you went with a Champagny, Lou Dort. There's one. This lineup happened to go LeBron, AD on this end, and then Cam Thomas. I guess you value that one out a little bit maybe. There's a path to spend more money than this did on one of these guard spots, is my point. So it kind of depends on how you position these guys, but it definitely looks more appropriate to put your value here. Take a 1-on-1 approach there. 1-on-1 approach basically here, although you can get away again with 2 pay-ups there. And then you're taking a value center unless you're taking AD at center. And that is just common through. Look at all these. A lot of maneuverability on this slate. Really interesting just combinatorics of this slate. I really like it. It's going to be a fun one to play. And with that, you guys, never pop it back to the big screen at the end of the show. With that, guys, I am going to say my goodbyes. Coming up on 5:30, let me get everything updated up at rotoscouts.com. Make sure you're checking that out for under $1 a day. A lot of value there and more to come. And let's see, what else do we have to talk about? Nothing else for tonight. NHL's up already. No football game tonight. Come on back tomorrow. More NBA for Wednesday. And then we'll be talking football on Thursday. Between now and then, good luck. Somebody go win something tonight. Show me those screenshots when you win. I'll see you tomorrow.